welcome everybody to Lunch with Lacey, our clever name for this series. I did want to say, first of all, I know Brianna, who's joining us, and maybe several other people on the call are on the West Coast and the LA area in particular, and we just wanted to send our thoughts to everybody and for everybody's safety. And some really cold weather on the East Coast also. So anyway, we just hope everybody is doing well and checking on one another. So all this month we're exploring various aspects of the Lacey Act and what it means for us. Each week we're going to focus on a specific element. This week is the first installment. We're dealing with sort of that initial commitment to compliance and making a plan today. The second one will be about documentation. Third one's going to be passing on that information to our customers. And then the fourth one will be kind of a catch-all question and answer. And the subsequent ones may sort of be shaped somewhat by the conversation of the previous ones. This is all sort of an evolving thing. It'll be every Thursday at noon, probably fairly succinct. Many of the resources that we're going to talk about in our discussions will be available on the Lacey page, the new Lacey page on the Federation website, which includes a link to the work that Lynn and Brianna and others have done on the Alliance website. That's really amazing. It's really years and years and years, decades of work that have gone into all of those resources, and I'm really grateful that those are there and that we can link to them. It's really our hope that through these discussions and through the resources on the website, we can make all of this less intimidating and just make it easier for people to move forward with confidence in all of this. It's new to everybody, but I think it's you'll see it's not as ominous maybe as it feels initially. One note I want to make, the Zoom call does say we're recording, which we are, but I wanted to note that while the meeting is open only to Federation members, it is going to be posted to the Lacey Act resource page on our website, which is public. And we felt like it was important to make it public as a service to anybody working in these fields, whether they're members of the Federation or not. And so just thought it was worth mentioning to people that any questions you ask, any answers given are going to be public. So I want to thank once again Lynn for being here to guide us through this, and also Brianna Goldberg, who is a bowmaker and an Alliance board member. And they are going to take it from here. Thank you, guys.
Well, good morning to everybody, at least good morning here. Now it's afternoon, I guess. Hello to everybody, I'm glad you're here. Brianna, we'll start with slide 1.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We plan to move at a slow pace of about 30 minutes for each session and leave plenty of time at the end for questions. Please try to limit your questions to the topic of the day. The Lacey Act has been around since the 1950s. As the slide explains, it is a U.S. conservation law that requires importers to provide documentation and declarations on all natural resources they are importing. The Lacey Act and CITES are two different things. This is not about endangered species, but about all species that are being imported into the U.S. from anywhere in the world.
It's my turn, but I first would like to just say that Brianna was evacuated yesterday from her home, and that fire in her area is at this point 0% contained. So I just wanted to encourage Brianna, if she gets a beep on her phone, an alert, to just take off and go. So safety first. Okay, Brianna? Slide number 3, this one. All makers and shops that use natural resources and buy imported finished violins, bows, violins, or bow accessories need to comply with the updated regulations. Everyone along the chain of custody, from tree to musician, is responsible. No exception. Ignorance is no excuse. And that's why we're here today. I think it goes against the grain for us to think that if somebody else breaks the law, that we should be responsible for it. That's their problem, not ours. But in this situation, we have to be extremely careful and protect ourselves. And so again, that's why we're here today, to learn the best ways to do that. Well, Evan mentioned the fact that this would become open to the public as things are recorded. And I think it's really important for us to understand the role that the Federation and Alliance working together, the powerful role that we have to help clean up a very messy situation that exists in the entire music industry. There's so much confusion, there's so much ignorance, and unfortunately, so much apathy as well. First, we learn as a group, and then we can expand our outreach to many others who buy and sell instruments and bows every day with little thought of the future of the species on which we all rely. Our efforts this month and going forward will be shared by John Bennett at the upcoming Standing Committee meeting in Geneva. It's the final CITES meeting before the big November 2025 decision on Pernambuco. It's very important for them to know of the important work that we're doing in order to spread the word and to comply with all of the changing laws. It's a way to demonstrate our commitment to conservation.
Although, as Lynn mentioned, the Lacey Act has been around since the 1950s, it was only in 2008 that wood and plant products were added to the list. It was also the date when the PPQ 505 was added to declare the import of all wood and wood products. Please note that in addition to honoring US laws, it will also prosecute violations of laws in foreign countries as well. Many people at the VSA asked what was going to change on December 1st, 2024. As it shows on the slide, since 2008, we've all been responsible for conducting legal trade for the entire chain. The Lacey Act monitors every species on the entire planet, so there has been a rolling start over the course of many years. In December, it was time for violins and bows to begin using HTS codes and the PPQ 505.
It's a bit premature to mention these pre-2008 imports, and we'll discuss it later in more detail. But I just wanted you to know that everything before 2008 is exempt, but PPQ 505 documentation is still required. So if you have, it was Peter Beer who asked the question, if I'm traveling from London to New York with a Strad, and I don't know where Strad got his wood, what do I do? The answer to that question, because it is an antique, is that yes, there is documentation that is required. Antiques would go, genus would say special, species would say pre-amendment, and country of harvest would be a list of all possible species. It's important to write information down. You're not going to remember it. If someone had a question and came to you in 5 years, you would say, well, yeah, maybe, or I don't know when I did that, or yeah, I remember. We need to have more specific details than that. So whatever we write would be terrific if we kept it all in one place. And this is the beginning of how we start to document the activities of our shop and justify our responsible actions. So it's important to write information down in case it is needed in the future. Every one of us needs to start, I have mine already started, a Lacey log. and I keep it in my shop for regular updates. Well, you're here today, and likely you've attended other sessions, maybe a session or two as well. So this is how the Lacey log will begin. Write down what sessions you have attended, including your staff, if that's applicable, and include the date so that you can document this at any time if you're ever asked what your actions have been in the past.
Taking a pledge might sound strange, but it's important to do for the future. It's a reminder that compliance is an important priority and that you are voluntarily participating. You can download this pledge from the AFVBM or Alliance website. Read, sign, and have it notarized. You can check around to see if there's a notary who will do this for free. Many banks and credit unions provide this free service for the community. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the pledge here. And that brings us to the end of today's session. We're now available to answer questions. Thank you.
It seemed like a very short part of it, but that is because the filling out the documents is something that I just didn't want to start with. I thought it was much more important for us to, as a group, make a commitment. And I know a pledge sounds funny. It sounds like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, but it really is a commitment to change. And that's what we need to do, because the way species have been used in the past is no longer working. And so we need to find some more responsible way to deal with that. So there will be question and answer time just on what we have accomplished so far. And if there's a lot of time left over, we could possibly move on to a few additional slides. But let's ask the questions and answers first on what we've just covered.
Start. So is there, I know, and Ashley was a representative from the Wood Products Association. This may seem like a silly question, but does it apply to only plant species, or is it to all natural materials?
It's every single natural material. It's everything on the planet. And she represents the wood products industry. Yep. And so when she talks about plant products or wood products. And she represents companies from Home Depot to little individual master makers in their shops. We, in our industry, need to be thinking even bigger than that, because particularly as bow makers, we have different species of wood. We have our leathers. We have all of our different windings to think about. We have all of our different tips to think about. We have lots of natural resources. And I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Okay. Ryan?
Hey, and thanks everybody for putting this on. It was definitely a little overwhelming. Even both sessions that I went to earlier this year or last year, I suppose. So thanks for putting this on. When you say natural materials, I mean, are you talking about living things, or are we talking about like metals too? Silver, gold, are those considered natural materials when you say that?
Nope, not necessary. Animal and plant, if I can just jump in.
Great. And then the other thing is, so I mean, I get that it sounds like what I need to do is take all of the pieces of wood, bow sticks, violin tops, bass bars, and maybe number them and catalog them, and keep cataloging them when they come in. Is that sound right so far?
Lynn, do you mind if I jump in for just a second?
Go right ahead, Emmett.
I'm sorry. So I think the answer is yes to that question, Ryan, and I'll let Lynn follow up with that. But when it comes to the Lacey Act, Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, the Lacey Act part is only part of importation if you're ordering something from another country. Is that true?
It is indeed. This is about buying. It's about buying stuff. And I wouldn't say just buying from another country. Obviously, many things will come from other countries, but might be sold by distributors in the United States. What we need to do, though, is to be able to ask questions and document the answers to those questions about the sources, the actual genus and species, and the country of harvest for those. There are laws now that will be going into effect at the end of 2025 in Europe that are they're very strict. For the longest time, the Lacey Act was the strictest environmental law on the planet. And now EUDR is going to surpass that because it's going to start to require georeferencing on every piece of wood that's imported into Europe. That will be a great service for us because that will be a pass-through for so many of us who are buying materials from Europe. And we will then be reassured that that we are buying legally sourced, sustainably sourced products going forward. What you're talking about, though, Ryan, is something that's very important, very necessary, but it's beyond the Lacey Act. So what the Lacey Act requires of you is that whatever is imported into this country, whether it's by a distributor or whether it's by you personally, whatever comes into this country needs to be recognized for the genus and species and its country of harvest. And all of that needs to be documented. What goes beyond that, though, will be in other lessons as we get there. So right now, we're just talking about buying stuff.
Okay, so maybe I'm a little bit ahead of the lectures, but I was thinking in terms of, I mean, it seems like there's two issues. One is the stuff that I buy starting from December of 24 or whenever the thing went, the documentation. Yep. And then there's also all the other stuff that I bought before for which I maybe need to get documentation to. Because if you're talking about things being imported, I mean, I don't think I've bought let me change that because it's going to be made public. I know many people who have only bought wood from Europe for the last many years. Now that would be wood that's imported. So that would mean it would need to be documented, right? Whether it's spruce from, I mean, if someone, not myself.
It will need to be, yes, it will need to be documented, but it doesn't need to be documented for the Lacey Act. So okay. It's a different question. There are so many things that are changing all at once, and that's why this is so chaotic for everybody. But you're reminding me of my stand partner who we were playing a Mahler symphony, and my stand partner raised his hand and asked a question of the conductor, and he was asking about a spot in the music that was we hadn't gotten there yet. And so he was asking a question in advance, and the conductor pointed out to him that he should be worrying about measure 52 right now, and then we'll worry about measure 100 when we get to it. There are so many things to be thinking about that once you have it step by step, I think you'll feel so much more secure than you do right now, because we're asking and need within our industry a far greater level of transparency and record keeping, documentation than we have ever had before. We've needed it for a long time, and now is the time when we're starting to do that. So it's going to feel very strange. So from December 1st on, or from today on, whenever you're ordering anything, whether it's fingerboards or whether it's violin outfits or whether it's student bows or whatever, I want you to have this information that you'll need so that you're doing due diligence, that the people that you're buying from aren't going to be criminals or accused of criminal behavior and get you into the mess as well. Did I see your hand up, Steve?
Yes, and I finally became a little less retarded and found out how you can do that with the yellow hand.
You can show me afterwards.
Yeah, okay. But one of the things that that now I'm confused about is that I thought that originally Lacey Act was for interstate commerce and was then later turned into also international. That I thought it so we're always talking about importing here, but I thought that like if you're, one of the things that I was involved with was um, California abalone shells
Mhm.
that I thought were also covered by Lacey Act, even if I'm not importing them from anywhere, that they'd also be part of the mix. Whereas that, or am I now jumping into CITES?
I think you're jumping into CITES at this point.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
And they're parallel tracks, but they're
yeah,
not the same thing. So let's just stick to Lacey Act right now.
okay.
Sorry, but
And I'm just trying to get clarity on what Lacey Act
Yes,
is,
of course. Yep.
I
because
took
I
that
thought it all
Lacey,
started with feathers in the Gilded Age.
Act course, and it does apply to interstate
does.
trade also if
Yep.
something was harvested illegally. So please
Exactly.
get the information straight.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the harvesting legally that is such a challenge. And I know that Ashley did mention a piano that was being moved from one part of the country to another part, and it had ivory keys and was confiscated. So it certainly is an issue. We can get a lot of that information for the interstate trade. We can get that from the distributors who are importing the goods that we use. And we'll be talking about this a little bit in lesson 2. If you're buying from people who, let's say Connolly Music, if I'm buying something from Connolly Music that is a natural resource, Connolly's already done all of the importation documentation, so he already knows what those species are. And it's going to be now our responsibility to get the information from them. The Lacey Act stops with the Lacey Act PPQ 505 when things come into the country. That's where their responsibility ends. However, since we're in part of that chain and the people that we sell to are also part of that chain, that information needs to continue down so that there's transparency and information every step of the way. And so for now, it's a change of the way business has been done, but you'll be able to ask these questions. Hopefully you'll get information from the distributors, and then you're going to know. So that would cover the much of the interstate transportation of things.
I believe Tom has a question.
Yes.
Just in relation to what you just said, I think it would be great if the distributors, when they send an invoice with the things they've just sold you, that they also include the documentation just as part of the paperwork. I mean, if they are truly part of this chain, then it would be nice if they connect with us in a more seamless kind of way. So you buy pegs from Connolly or International or Hoffler in Germany or something, and they include that documentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely with you. And I think it's just new and it's starting slowly. But the minute people start asking for that information, I have had no pushback whatsoever. And I think it's quite the opposite. I have complete support when I've mentioned it. I mentioned it to International Violin. I mentioned it to David Werther. David immediately put it up on his website, so the information is there. I know if you're buying from Paulus in Germany, they list all of the species information and country of harvest now. So it's something that's growing.
Yeah.
And not everybody has gotten the message yet, because probably some people will think, oh, this is going to cost us a fortune. But with electronics these days, that's not really a very good excuse.
Yeah. I had 2 other questions. Earlier in the talk, you were talking about wood and identification. And if you have old fingerboards and you were told that they are Indian or Sri Lankan, but I really don't know by looking at them necessarily how to tell which is which. How do we find that out, or can we just make our best guess? Or is it disadvantageous to make the wrong guess? you know?
It is definitely disadvantageous to make the wrong guess because then it looks like a lie. And that's not the intent of this. I think with older materials, and we'll spend much more time talking about this in other lessons, I think it's important for us to simply document what we know. What the term due diligence means caring to find out everything you can about it. It doesn't mean that you're going to spend the next year trying to have wood analyses done of different fingerboards or different blocks of wood that we have in our shops. That's not realistic. But things that predate, particularly if they predate the 2008 date when wood was added to the Lacey Act, all we can really expect is that people will write down approximately when you purchased it, whatever you can remember honestly about it. What is your honest story about that? Approximately when did you purchase it? Where did you buy it? What were you told about it? I think that's the kind of documentation that we can all realistically do,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to put down some scientific bullshit, if you'll excuse the message. We don't want to be out there just making phony statements or phony documents. That would not serve the purpose well at all.
Could I ask one last thing?
Yeah.
You know, going through this today, I'm already wanting to see some of those earlier slides again, because we have a little more context. Is it
Yeah.
possible to, you know, show a couple of those again, and maybe we can talk about them now that we have a little discussion under our belts?
Why don't we do one slide at a time
Yeah.
and stop after each slide and then answer whatever questions might be applicable? Excuse me. Okay. Brianna, you want to read your text and then we can stop for questions?
Sure. Let's see. So the Lacey Act has been around since the 1950s. And as the slide explains, it's a U.S. conservation law that requires importers to provide documentation and declarations on all natural resources they are importing. The Lacey Act and CITES, as we mentioned, are two different things. This is not about endangered species, but about all species that are being imported into the U.S. from anywhere in the world.
Any questions at all about that so far?
It's like, Ryan?
Yeah, hey, I'm good. I'm probably going to be a real pain about some of these things. And tell me if this is jumping the gun, but if as I understand the strict liability portion, we're responsible for things even if we're not the importer, if they have been imported, right?
We're responsible. We are part of the chain of custody. And as being part of that chain, we are equally responsible under the law for any illegal activities that might occur. Pretty scary.
Yeah. So the second part of my earlier question, which I didn't quite get to, and it's okay if this is something we talk about later, is I think everyone's thinking about the raw materials, but like let's say a shop owner somewhere takes an instrument or bow in trade from someone, you know, then what? I mean, because that information has not, you know, we haven't really been keeping track of this. Let's say you've got you take a violin in or a bow that's undated, but from a living maker, or someone who's just recently passed away, say, then what? I mean, if that bow came from France, then you would be part of the chain of custody if you sell it. Any idea how we handle that, and that can be later, but that
Well, it could be later, but it's an important question because it really shows what a universal world we live in. You know, we're all buying and selling from all over the world. We don't just stay in our little communities and find what we want at our local hardware stores. We're buying and selling all over the place. And so that's important. If it's a living maker, you have the opportunity, no matter where they are in the world, to get species information. and document it. But if it's in this country and somebody walks into your shop and they've got a bow in their hands and they want to sell it, or they want to put it on consignment or whatever, it's not a Lacey Act issue. So right now, as of today, you don't have to worry about it. We will talk about how helpful it will be to help the owner of that bow and the next owner of that bow by providing a document that will list all of the different contents of it, so that whenever there's any questions asked or species become endangered, they'll have the documentation that they know to be able to cross borders safely. But that's not a Lacey Act bringing things into the country concern. It's only from December 1st that we have to have that paperwork.
Maybe, okay, sorry, maybe we'll come back to this. I'm just confused why, if there's a strict liability, and you can answer me offline if I'm just completely in the weeds here, but if there's a strict liability, why I wouldn't be responsible as part of the chain of custody if I sell something that was made in Europe and then imported here and someone's bringing it in trade? I'm just lost, but that happens easily. So anyway, thanks.
I can just add one thing that we've mentioned in some previous presentations, is that sometimes if they can't provide the information for you, you might have to make the decision to not do business with them. And it's a very difficult decision, but I think until everybody sort of gets online and complies with all of this, sometimes you might have to make the decision to not import or not buy, unfortunately.
And I would also like to add, Ryan, that there are no dumb questions. We're doing this as we are so that there's so much conversation time so that everyone will feel comfortable asking questions, and we all learn from the same questions and from the answers. So I think of it as I much appreciate your questions. Thank you.
And
Any other questions?
somehow my yellow hand went away again. So anyway, I'm hate to beat this dead horse, especially if it wasn't imported properly, but I jumped over to Wikipedia again, and Lacey Act started in 1900, and then it was rewritten in 1907, and this was all part of interstate commerce. And so is 1950 a new starting date that I should only focus on and ignore all of the information I've gained about Lacey Act prior to that?
Well, I think all information is powerful, but in the 1950s was when they started to get serious about importing, and about also the whole concept of honoring another country's environmental laws. That's very unusual. Europe doesn't have anything like that.
Yeah, and the Lacey Act originally was for interstate commerce.
It goes way back, yes, and it was all about feathers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So
It just got stronger and stronger and stronger,
Okay.
and it became more and more a part of our lives as you get to the December 1st deadline. But it's the dates to remember really are the 2008 and the 2024. So
Okay.
2008 was when that was a long time. If this was starting way back when in the early 1900s, and it took until 2008 to add plant species to it, you can see that this was all about ducks and geese and feathers and other things that I'm certain was a full-time job for them. This has got to be a massive task for our government to try to monitor. So again, the more we can do ourselves voluntarily, the less we're going to have to worry about being dragged into other required mandated documentation.
Yeah. And also my experience with these things is that it's best to educate yourself, because when you come in contact with somebody working in the field for fish and wildlife or whatever, it's really important that you know more about the violin trade than they do, because you can't expect them to know the nooks and crannies of every species on the earth. And I've found lots and lots of times that I just have to respectfully educate them about things because they just can't be kept up on all this.
Yes, that's exactly right. It is a huge challenge. And that's why we're having these meetings so that we can really dig down into this. And then if there are specific questions, my goal is to collect all of the questions, collect all the answers, and as I said, get them off to my expert friends, make sure that they're fully vetted so that our answers are absolutely squeaky clean, and then get back to everybody. So you'll have a file on our websites, both websites, that you can use as a resource as well. There are very few people that I've spoken to at USDA or at APHIS that really know anything about the music industry.
Yeah.
And so you're right, we have to be there for ourselves, and that's why we're starting this today. We would have just added something to chat that I wanted to take a look at. Hold on just a second. Uda added the example given that IWPA Lacey compliance course was a tonewood dealer who had trees cut by poachers in a U.S. national forest. Yep, he ended up in prison. So you do have to be careful, even with wood materials purchased in the United States. Absolutely. We are going to need to have full documentation on every natural resource that we purchase. I think that will be the shape of our industry going forward. And it is a long time coming. We're very, very slow to get documentation. We think about other things. When we look at wood, we're not thinking not always thinking about where it was cut, but we're looking at the quality of wood, the straightness of the grain, the tap tone, or whatever it is we're about. We're thinking about it becoming an instrument and how will it become the most wonderful instrument. And so we now need to add to those very valuable musical decisions the legality of where is it coming from and can you prove it? We need to be able to get as much documentation as we possibly can. And then the next question, if imported materials were purchased from a U.S. supplier distributor post 2008, but that supplier distributor has since closed their business or died, what is recommended given the supplier is unable to fulfill a contemporary request for imported documents from many years ago? I'm going to ask that question of USDA contacts and get a really detailed answer for you on that. I think that's true for lots of purchases that have been made since 2008. So I'll come back to that. Any other questions on this? Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, that's taking a leadership role. The Alliance was created just for this purpose. It was to take a leadership role, not just came about the same time as Pernambuco concerns, but it wasn't about just Pernambuco. It was about all of the species used in instrument and bow making. And so our three tenets were representation, and that's John Bennett representing all of us at the CITES meetings and other important meetings around the world. It comes to education, which I think is an important part of what we're doing today, and support of direct action, which is raising funds and helping other groups like IPCI and Ebenholst and other groups who are on the ground doing conservation work in different countries. So when it comes to the education part, there are lots of different aspects. There's a way for us to be working on curriculum for the Lutherie schools. What we're doing here, what we started way before the December deadline was to bring in experts to try to inform all of you that things were changing, that there would be additional requirements, additional responsibilities for us in the field. And so as we move from just the Alliance to the Alliance and its members, like the Federation, then we really need to make an effort to get this out to the larger musical community, the community that I think is out there using up a lot of resources on student instruments and student bows. Unfortunately, so many of them are disposable. We have a lot of mess in our industry, and we need to get as much information as we possibly can to the largest audience that we possibly can. So that's another important goal, I think, also of the Federation. And I think that's why this is such a good team. Were there any questions about that one? Look at that big chunk of ebony. 2008, wood and plant species were added to the Lacey Act, and a new import declaration was added, the PPQ 505. At that time, it became illegal to import or purchase any wood or other natural resource that was taken in violation of the laws of the U.S. or a foreign country. And I would just like to add to this that that the fact that it covers foreign countries is an issue, could be an issue with Brazil. There was a situation at CITES in 2022 where a Fish and Wildlife representative, one of the CITES management team, came to John Bennett and Heather Noonan, who represents the League of American Orchestras, and said, the U.S. is the biggest user of illegally harvested Pernambuco in the world. She wasn't talking about raw materials. She was talking about finished bows. And this is a challenge because when a bow from past years until recently, when a bow was in finished condition, it could be imported without CITES documentation. The raw materials needed CITES documentation. The finished bows did not. However, there are investigations going on in Brazil. Many problems. We don't know the final results of any of this, but we don't know the legality, the source of all of the wood that created those bows. And this, so today, going forward, the Brazilian bow making companies, many bow making companies around the world are selling bows made of ipe. They're bringing them into the country, and we're all thinking, oh, well, ipe, it's a solution to the overuse of Pernambuco. So this might work. However, we still need to know the species, the genus and species, and we still need to know the origin. We still need to know that this wood was harvested legally. And I don't know anybody who's providing that information for us yet. So we need to inform ourselves as to the best way to buy. And that's going to do a good job, I think, for protecting us in the future. I think there'll be a messy period to go through as things shift over, but I do think that we're heading in the right direction. Any questions at all about that? Looking at that big piece of ebony makes me realize that ebony will be our next greatest challenge. And because it comes from so many different sources around the world, we're going to have some real challenges with identification. And I'm not sure how many species of ebony will be listed in 2025, but I do think that there's an effort to list multiple species at CITES. I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen. So we need to be prepared, and we need to realize that this isn't just about Pernambuco. This is about all species that are coming into our country. Yes, hi, James.
Were you talking to me?
I was. Your hand is up.
Oh, yes. Okay. You called me Dave.
Oh, I thought I called you James. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. Anyway, okay. Yeah, I have quite a lot of pieces bigger than the one in your picture that I bought in 2005 before it applied to the Lacey Act. What do I have to do if I want to sell it or use it?
Just have to document that it's pre-convention or pre-2008. I have a document that
I
I
can document that easily. I have receipts and pictures.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that's all you need. We'll be talking about the importance of doing an inventory a little bit later on, but it really is important for us to take a look at what we have for materials in our own shop. And kind of now would be a good time to do those, because as you start buying things and adding to them, perhaps it would become more confusing. You wouldn't necessarily remember what was what. So to be able to have a baseline, this is what I owned as of December 1st, 2024. I think that would be very, very useful for all species. And you're lucky to have your invoices, because many people don't. I think many people bought things and perhaps wrote them off on their taxes and kept whatever invoices they had with their tax papers for the required length of time, 4 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And then those invoices just went away. So unfortunately.
I bought quite a lot of print and buco longer ago than that. I did keep all of my invoices and everything like that. Some of it I bought together with Reed Hudson, and Reed, when the new rules came along, said, well, his accountant had told him that he didn't have to keep anything older than 7 years, so he had thrown it all out.
Exactly.
And so I said, Reed, I am now your best friend.
And you're also a good friend for whoever will be buying this from you. I mean, you and I aren't going to live forever, and we will be retiring one of these days. And when we do, we're going to want that wood to go to a good home, to turn into the legacy of this. And so it's very important that you have information then that you can pass on to the buyers, so that documentation, even though you're the one that paid for it, that documentation of the date that it was purchased is and will become more and more important for the next generations of owners or users of that wood. Yeah, Tom.
So let's just say this wood that Jim got, and Jim, this is all hypothetical. I'm not suggesting that I know anything, but let's just say that the people who cut that wood cut it illegally, and Jim bought it with the understanding that it was legal and, in good faith and everything. Again, hypothetical. So then what? Is Jim obligated to not use that material, never sell it, destroy it? I mean, what is, if you find you have something that is of questionable origin from a long time ago, what do you do?
Well, that's beyond the problems that we have to deal with Lacey Act. If it's before 2008, you can buy, sell, do whatever you want, but I would still document if I had documentation, or I would create documentation saying where I bought it, when I bought it, what I was told it was. I would pass that information along no matter what the date, just to try to have a transparency. I think there was probably a lot of illegal cutting going on back then. Let's be realistic about this. I don't think people were all that worried about it, and perhaps there weren't even regulations that made it illegal. It just was happening. The laws are kind of a reaction to overcutting, I think, in many situations. So I don't know, and I'm not going to go back and do a historical analysis of what was happening in the forests in 2005. And I certainly wasn't there watching it be cut legally or illegally. So there's a lot of information that we don't have, but this is really looking into the future. I think that's what's important for us now, is to just realize that we can stop this kind of blindly buying wood products. I mean, that's true whether we're making a violin or whether we're building a house. We need to know where the stuff's coming from, and we need to know that we're not destroying or wiping out a species in the process. That's why all 112 epay species were listed simultaneously on CITES because of the building profession, and because the trees were being cut so fast that they didn't even take time to analyze what species it was that was being cut faster than another species. They just said, no more epay. Epay bows can be finished bows, can be imported, they're exempt, and they can be brought into the United States. But it's going to get tougher and tougher as time goes on.
Lynn, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So I'm reminded of Ashley's talk. Tom's question reminded me of Ashley's talk about assessing and mitigating your risks.
Yeah.
In terms of, you can only do so much, as you're saying, to sort of historically investigate the supply chain of all of your materials. But as it pertains to having a compliance plan for the Lacey Act, assessing a situation, talking to a supplier, whether you're talking to a domestic supplier who did the Lacey paperwork when they imported it, or you're talking to a company that you would be importing from, asking as many questions as you can. And I know this is jumping into the second lecture a little bit, but asking these questions and documenting those questions so that and looking at the risk. And then, as Brianna said, maybe you decide if there's questions that you're not getting a good answer to, maybe you don't do that deal. But in any case, this commitment to comply that we're talking about, I think the idea is that it's giving you a paper trail of trying to mitigate those risks. Certainly on any future imports, that's the goal of that idea. So that commitment that we have up on the website, the idea is that that's the first step, but it means that then you have to do all these other steps, all this other document. Does that track with what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think the pledge is just something that is just our way of saying that we recognize the environmental concerns. We recognize the reason why there is a Lacey Act in the first place, and we're willing to do what we can to comply with that. And then if there's ever any question at all, you have your little log, and it's going to have some questions and answers that you've asked different distributors. It's going to have a pledge. It's going to have what efforts did you make to understand this whole experience, this whole moment in history, and you will be it'll be to your best interest to be able to document that you at least are making an effort to try. I think our distributors are going to learn from this too, that they can't just go out there and buy by price or whatever, but that they really need to start thinking about where they are they really getting what they say they're getting in terms of genus and species and country of harvest. And as I said, the EUDR regulations that will be coming in at the end of 2025 are going to make it extremely challenging for illegal wood to get into Europe. They're really clamping down on it. And so that's going to help us tremendously. Going forward, that will help us tremendously. Brianna, are you still right there? Seems to.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, please. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. So here are the two responsibilities. I don't know how many of us knew this back in 2008, but we are responsible to conduct legal trade. I'm hoping that just is an ethical choice that we make in our businesses. But we need to know where things are coming from, and we are responsible. We are part of that larger chain. We've been excluded from it in the past. We haven't gotten all of this information, and that's why we have to be advocates for ourselves and get out there and ask for it. And what changed was that this other secondary responsibility is that we now have this declaration with the HTS codes. And someone mentioned down below that HTS codes change periodically. And so you always want to be checking, and we'll show you how to do that in the next lesson. Always checking to make sure that you're using the right HTS code and that you're filling out that declaration properly if you are importing things and passing on accurate information. Next slide. So this was the Peter Beer question. And the point that I just wanted to make here, I don't want to go into great detail on it because we will be discussing it later in detail, but just to reassure you that old instruments traveling into this country, old instruments that are coming here for sale, still do need to have the same paperwork. It has a special use designation, and that Brianna will show you how to do that with the genus and the species. So genus will be special, species would be listed as pre-amendment, pre-2008. Country of harvest would be a little bit more challenging because we've got to list a few possibilities of what wood Stradivarius might have used. And we can just use historical records perhaps for that. Or I think we need to be able to go back to USDA and just let them know that it's unknown. And I'll get an answer on that, on what we need to do for country of harvest. Because I'm not sure. Peter is adding wood species tests are available. Yes, they are available. There was Pernambuco wood that was transported from the United States to Canada that had no documentation on it whatsoever. But the Canadian CITES, so we're talking about CITES and we're not talking about Lacey Act, did require DNA testing or whatever it was that they did. They cut off a small little 10 millimeter chunk off each board, and they studied it and verified that it had been cut originally back in the 1950s. And so that was allowed to pass into Canada as a result of that. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of that as we go along. CITES has made it difficult because CITES comes up with a plan. They come up with an amendment or a description of what they expect. But then they leave it to each individual country to make it work in their way. And that isn't always easy to understand, but we'll be coming back to that. That's not a week one kind of question. It's more sophisticated than that. Cameron, got a question?
Yes, ma'am. Just thinking about doing that sort of scientific analysis of the wood. The last time, and maybe I'm a little out of touch on this, but I thought there was some just understanding that there wasn't really the possibility of doing that on Pernambuco. Not only necessarily to determine the species, but especially to determine the age. But for those of us that have, stock of perhaps old wood, but no documentation of its origin, is that a possibility of something to get as a preemptive thing to make sure that the wood that we're using is legal or at least usable going forward?
Again, this is outside of the realm of the Lacey Act, but what happened in 2007, which is a Pernambuco date, 2008 is a Lacey Act date. 2007 was when Pernambuco was first listed at the CITES. And so we were asked at that time to do a voluntary inventory of our woods. We were asked to do it by a certain date. They made the mistake of using the word voluntary, which to half of the bowmakers or wood owners in this country, voluntary meant I can do it or I don't have to. Oh, well, I'm too busy. I'm not going to do that. Voluntary meant do it. Absolutely, positively do it. But you don't need to send it to us because we don't have the capacity here in our office to be able to manage all this stuff coming in from bow makers. So we trust that you guys are you care about your wood sources. You're going to take good care of those wood stocks. So we want you to do that inventory. About 60% of the makers in the United States did an inventory at that time and have that documentation. So that wood is all free and clear. That should be sold with proof of that documentation, that pre-convention documentation, so that everybody knows. And on my declarations, when I sell something, I always say pre-convention Pernambuco. However, there are a lot of people who either weren't around in 2007. Cameron, you look like a young man. I don't think you were making bows in 2007. Brianna, I know you weren't. Maybe many of you were not. CITES has sort of dropped the ball on this, and we're working on it constantly, because what we would like to be able to do, there's this resource of underdocumented wood, or underdocumented wood. And believe me, that's a big question that we're working on all the time. So when it comes to DNA testing or anything, obviously that worked for Canadian customs. I don't think if the wood were coming from Canada to the United States that they would have had the same response. So that's a to be determined, to be determined as we get closer and closer to the 2025 decision. I can't stress this enough, and this doesn't have to be a fancy deal. This doesn't have to be anything beyond your capacity, or you don't have to be somebody who has great computer skills. I don't. I have a little notebook on my bench, and I just put in there the different talks that I'd listened to, different training that I had taken. And from there, when I buy things, and I haven't had to, but when I buy things, I've got a plan, and we'll talk about that plan first thing next week when we get started. We'll have a prep for how to buy things, and I have I have the questions, and I know who I'm going to ask first. I'm going to ask first from the person that I buy my horsehair from, because I'm very curious to know exactly where that horsehair comes from, exactly its source of origin, its species. I'm going to ask the conditions of the country. Is it child labor? There's a lot that we might be able to encourage others to look at. So, and also protect ourselves in the process. It's just a way of complying with this. So I'll document it in my Lacey log with whatever information I get, the date and whatever other information I gather. Now, I'm not going to have to ask the same person that I'm buying horsehair from. I'm not going to have to ask them over and over and over again. And so if I'm buying things regularly from the same source, I'm not going to have to get bogged down in constant bureaucracy or constantly justifying what I'm doing, or you can just say, are there any changes? And if the answer is no, then you just don't worry about it. If there's a change, or maybe the ebony is now, instead of coming from Cameroon, maybe it's coming from another country. You might want to document something like that. But I don't see that this is something that you're going to have to spend a huge amount of time doing. When it comes to what you do with this information, that again is something that we'll talk about in great detail as we get closer and closer to our final week. There's something called the Know Your Bow campaign, and it goes right back to what that CITES representative said to John and Heather about the illegal wood used for bows, for making these student bows that were being imported into the United States, and her concern that this was perhaps illegal wood. I think what's most important for us as we're going through this is to just inform the musicians who are doing the buying that they're completely oblivious to this. I don't have customers that would be out there doing illegal things or buying illegal things. I wouldn't be. I know they wouldn't be either. So this is a way for us with this Lacey log to really open up the conversation, to really inform our customers, to really make sure that even the people who are buying on eBay or Amazon, or the people who are buying bulk bows that are coming from China, that all of these people are beginning to understand the importance for the environment and for our businesses as well, the importance of this transparency. So the log is for collecting information that you get from other people, but we'll show you later on that it's also what you need to pass off. And you might want to do it on your invoices. If you're selling a student bow to somebody and you feel secure in the source, feel secure in the information that you got, and you want to pass it on, then on the invoice, you'll need to just mention the materials that were used in it. And then if they need to do any travel, international travel, they can have that documentation, but they can also have that documentation if they need to get additional, if they need to get a CITES musical instrument certificate. And that, again, is way down the line. We don't need to worry about it on day one. Yes, Jim.
Another question. I have quite a lot of maple and also some spruce. I don't think either of those things are on the CITES or Lacey Act right now, but I'm considering moving it from Canada to the United States. Do I have to worry about Lacey or right now?
Yes, you do. You absolutely do, because it doesn't matter whether it's an endangered species or not. If it's coming into the country, you'll need to know all that information on the PPQ 505. So you will need to know where it came from, know what species and where it came from. And there are some threatened maple species out there, not particularly Canadian or American, but I know Romania is hard hit. I know the Chinese are now buying wood for instruments from Russia, and there are additional paperwork, additional problems that are added because it's Russia. So, so there's a lot that we need to know about this. But the answer to your question is, if it's coming into this country and it's from a natural resource, Lacey Act, yes.
Oh dear.
That wasn't what you wanted to hear, I'm sure.
No, it's not.
I know. Okay, is that the end of our day one?
Thank you very much.
And the next time is going to be a little bit longer. And I think the going through it once, talking about it, going through it a second time brings up additional questions. Part of the newness of all of this is that we don't even know what questions to ask. There's so much going on all at once with USDR and Lacey and CITES. We don't even know where we fit in that and how best to move forward in a responsible way. And so to be able to run through the slides, talk about them, run them a second time if we have time always to do that. That will be just a very important thing for us to do. And hopefully all of you will feel comfortable asking questions. And again, I don't pretend, Brianna doesn't pretend to know every answer to every question, because there's so many little specific details. But we do have resources, and I trust that we'll be able to get you good, solid answers that will benefit all of us. So next time is going to be how to fill out all these documents if we need. What do you need and how to fill them out? So it's going to be the Brianna show. because she's the one who's made some pretty wonderful videos. So it's not going to just be talking through things, but it's going to be actually watching her as she creates these different documents. And you can see that she makes it look easy.
Well, thank you, Lynn and Brianna, so much. I will say on the note of Brianna's video, which is wonderful, that is on the AFVBM website that was sent out. If you go to the AFVBM landing page, it's under resources, Lacey Act. And so that video is there already if you want to see it. I would encourage everybody, please go look at the website, go look at the Alliance website. There's a bunch of stuff there. And it may raise questions for everybody going into our future meetings. And the more we can get into these videos, the better a resource it is for everybody in the future. So I would encourage you to go to that website, or if you have questions or things that you want to see added to the website, feel free to email me about that also. And I guess with that, we'll wrap up.
Evan, can I ask Brianna one quick question, or ask
Yes,
you
of
one
course.
quick question? Is the video that's up on the website, is that something that was Brianna's VSA presentation?
Yes, it's an expanded version of the VSA presentation. So it's what I did at VSA, a lot slower with some added information. So it's about 22 minutes long. And it's on YouTube, on the Alliance channel, and on these websites as well.
Brianna had 10 minutes to bring everybody up to speed at VSA, and it left everyone with their heads spinning, I think. So we'll move at a much slower pace, much more realistic pace. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.